New York City staff unfortunately had a conflict.
Okay. So next slide, Adam.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Can you see that okay?
It's really tiny.
Okay.
Is any way to get it in a bigger mode? Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
That's better.
Oh, okay. Did you want to do this too?
Hello. Yeah. Oh, okay, so first off, I'm at Franklin County today, and one of the things that's been built into the requirements for this year is that June and I visit all of the different project sites, of which we have 7, and we've actually been given a list of criteria to look at when we're on the site visits, and so we are tweaking that list, and we'll be sending that to everyone so that as other site visits come up, you'll know what kinds of things we're looking at. There are some things we need to look at administratively, as well as looking at, obviously, program things, and also things that the paperwork that you're using in terms of evaluating and validating the actual programming that's happening. So those are some of the things that we'll be going over with, as well as some things related to fiscal matters. In fact, Ruth, I was in the midst of sending you an email asking you to resend me those 3 items that you wanted me to add to the current site list that I have, site visiting list. So if you
will do
message, that would be helpful.
Will do.
But this is very exciting because after hearing about programs for so long, there's nothing like actually having a chance to see them in action. In May, I went down to Suffolk County and spent a day with Vicki, and it was just wonderful getting to see what the young people there are doing. Each program is so unique, and they're all so exciting, and we've got wonderful partners, and the more that we are able to learn and know about those things, then the more we can share with each other and even strengthen what we're doing further. So that's really exciting. The other thing that just happened is that the RFP for year 7 was released. Actually,
I just wanted to mention that I am working with Erie, Tompkins, and Broome to set up site visits this summer, and we've pretty much got Erie and Broome nailed down, and Megan promised to get me a date for the Tompkins site visit that I'll be doing. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, that's great. As time goes so fast, you know, we're practically halfway through the program year, actually. So it is important that we get these in and get them scheduled in time that if we do need to make any kind of tweaks or changes, there's still time to do that. So the next item has to do with the RFA, which was just released, literally. I think it came out on Friday. Did people receive an email from Nina indicating that? Steve, you didn't see anything? No. Okay. We're in the process of looking at the RFA, June and I, and we'll be getting back to you very shortly. There are some things related to indirect costs that we're trying to get resolved because that has implications for what we'll be able to do programmatically as we move forward. But we're still working on that with folks at Cornell, and so there's not a lot that we can share right now. But do expect to hear from us very soon. June, I don't have the RFA in front of me. Do you recall what the due date is?
It's August 25th.
Okay. And what was it last year?
I think it was like around Labor Day. It was in September.
Okay.
And the RFA does say that the decisions and awards will be announced September 16th. So they're trying to bump the whole thing up a bit. But once again, this will prove challenging with multiple years running on top of one another, et cetera, et cetera. So there's much to be considered.
Right. And if we are going to deal with indirect costs, which we probably will, there's no guarantee that we'll get a supplement as we had this past year. And so that will have implications for the size of the awards for the project sites. So more to come very shortly. June, do you want to say a word about the upcoming WebEx and webinars?
Yeah. Thank you to everybody who sent in their preferences. The two top-ranked things were planning for a workshop that we might do at the 4-H conference in October, and common reporting tools. We're going to be looking up quite a bit, thanks to Angela, on the reporting tools that she has used and documentation backup today. So we may want to rethink what we need to focus on for July. We have not heard whether or not our workshop proposal was accepted. So we will try and figure out what our topic for next month is after this call and take it from there. And I'll just go on to the next.
And they're going to let folks know?
I understand they are in the throes of deciding, so maybe that's something that will happen at the district meeting today. I don't know. We have, oh, shoot, somebody's at the door. We have a webinar coming up tomorrow or the 16th from the National Mentoring Training folks, and I've sent out the links for registering for those. You do need to be registered. If you cannot attend, those are also recorded. And the other thing I want to remind you of that's not on the slide is that the surveys, the midpoint survey is due at the end of the month. Everything needs to be administered and entered into the Qualtrics by June 30th. And our second progress report covering April 1 to June 30 will be due to Jackie for her review July 11th. Excuse me while I answer the door.
Okay. Hey, June?
Yeah?
Steve just asked me whether there's a new link for the next round of surveys.
Definitely is. I will send it to you if you don't already have it.
Okay. Thank you. Before we turn the mic over to Ruth and to Angela, I just want to mention a request that came from Betsy McKay, our Federal Partnership Manager at National 4-H Council. Apparently, the Council has applied for the 2016 U.S. 2020 STEM Mentoring Awards. And as part of that process, they have to get volunteers to fill out a survey. And they're hoping that New York State will help us in asking some of our mentors to fill out the survey. They're required to have at least 10 in total. So we're going to send a link out. They said they sent it to us, but I'm not sure whether we have it or not. We're going to ask you to see if you can find some of your mentors who might be willing to fill out the survey. It has to be done by June 30th. And where are we? We're at June 14th now, so we have about 2 weeks. So if you think that you have a mentor who would be willing to do this, we would really appreciate it. I'll make sure that we get that link to you right away. Okay? Does anyone have a question, or does anybody know of anybody that they think would be a good person to fill out one of those surveys? And I know we don't have everybody on the line, but if anybody comes to your mind right away, let us know. Okay, well then for now I'm going to turn this over to Ruth, and we'll get that link to you, the survey information and the link to you within the next day.
Thank you, Jackie. I just have a couple of quick points as to what is going on currently in primarily processing expenses. We are still, by we I mean I have 3 other individuals that are doing first reviews of invoices from the associations, and those are Helena, Brittany, and Chris. I've put that out in email, mentioned to you their names so that if you hear from any of them, that you would be as responsive as you would to me. And we've had very good response with the initial invoices coming in as I had asked for them as the subcontract agreements were signed. But our status right now is I have pounds and stacks of invoices that I'm doing the final review on to get paid, because we're dealing with 6 months of expenses on initial invoices for the association. So bear with us on a couple of things. One is that we have received these invoices within roughly the last 30 days and are getting through them county by county so that it makes the review more consistent and go quicker if during that period of time we actually receive 2 invoices, but again, they're covering like 6 months of time. So they should be appearing on your association accounts as paid in June, in the month of June. But realize that we're also looking at several months, at least 3 months, of the university support expenses that are coming in on yet another invoice. So I have sent out a request here maybe a couple of weeks ago. Please, it did get sent to all the main finance contacts that are the ones submitting the invoices, as well as all main program contacts who are responsible for budgetary matters, to say do not send any more university support invoices which are tied to a purchase order number until I give further notice, because we have got to catch up on processing the grant expenses. It's critical to the funding available for the purchase orders. And right now, we're about $10,000 in the hole. So, and I have university fiscal year end, June 30th, and I'm going to have to transfer other funds if I don't get these other invoices processed to get funding into that university support account. Then I'm going to have to transfer funds from one of my other event accounts or something like that. So I did have at least one person come back to me and said, is that what you really meant? And I said, yes, that's what I really meant. And so if there are any, on the part of your associations, if you're aware of any issues, please contact me directly and I can go into it further with you. The other thing about invoice reviews, as I'm seeing them come in, is that I'm really disappointed to see miscategorization of costs that's being put into supplies. Again, entrance program fees or something that's a ticket is an other cost item. It's not a supply expense. Space rental is not a supply expense. So people who are responsible for budgets, you generally are approving all of the expenses that then wind up getting invoiced to us. And I see many putting down even the line of the budget. Please look carefully at that, because that's the kind of thing that's going to delay payment and actually require a budget modification, and that's the type of thing that I really want to avoid with all of the double invoicing going on and the other work involved with the grant this particular year. And then just some feedback on going over business purpose at the mini conference. I am finding the improvement of the explanation or business purpose for the expenses that are coming through that we need, like every supply that's purchased, that sort of thing. What was the bus for? You know, how many people? Where'd you go? Were they mentors, mentees, staff? Food purchases, the business purposes are coming through not only improved, but what I mean is greater detail, and I think that the finance staff is part of that. So great teamwork there. And I'm done unless anybody has questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Ruth.
Ruth,
I think, and now turn it over to Angela.
I had a question. I remember back in March when there was the national conference dealing with finances, there was a comment that everything spent by June 30th must be turned in and paid out by like July 15th or something like that because of the end of the federal year that National 4-H has to adhere to. Is that?
That's correct. But that means that expenses processed by Cornell on the grant account need to be billed out within a couple of weeks, and I do that.
Okay.
So if expenses, for instance, in an association, you won't be billing us for June expenses until the end of July. That's the schedule that I've asked for and that we have not gotten on yet because we're still doing the initial invoices. I'll send out reminders. I don't have many May invoices, for instance, but whatever I pay of the association invoices appearing on the Cornell grant account through June 30th, me, Ruth Campbell, has to get a claim in for all of our expenses through June to sponsor.
Okay. So nothing really specific to our association that we're doing differently?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, am I up?
You're up. I just wanted to tell folks that we received how this came to be, that Angela is sharing this presentation with you. I guess it must have been earlier this year, maybe like February or March. We received a message from National Council asking us to send validation for the reports information that was shared in one of our quarterly reports. We received that information that request from is it Teresa?
It was Teresa, and the date of the first one was March 14th.
Right. And we realized that there was some very, very specific types of information that they're expecting us to compile that would be very, very helpful in the event that any one of us, because they could choose any county and decide that they want more proof that the things that you've indicated on your reports are, in fact, what's happening in your county. So being able to provide additional documentation is really important, and it's something that we need to start to do now if you're not already collecting that kind of information. And fortunately, they chose Erie County and Angela, who happens to have meticulous notes and documentation that we thought might be helpful if everyone had a chance to see how she was able to provide the information that was required. So Angela, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to share what the actual questions that they had for you, and then what kind of information you were able to provide to help validate the information you had sent initially.
Right, and that's what I did. I walked us these slides walk through the request, the questions, and then there's some separate documents. So we're ready for slide 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Here is what I'm going to do is actually what Jackie suggested, which I'm glad we were thinking alike. So I will share with you the questions posed by the National 4-H Council, what documentation was provided to them, and how they responded each time documentation was provided, because as it turned out, there was more than one request. It turned out that we actually got 3 different requests, all following up from the first 3 questions that came up, and we can go to the next slide. Oh, actually I said March 14th. The email was on March 10th. The request was by Teresa Melton, and she was asking for validation documentation from the 3rd quarter of the previous year or the year 5 of the National Mentoring Program. And the selection is random, and the email came out on the 10th, and I believe to Jackie, and then everything that was requested needed to be back to Teresa by March 17th, so roughly 1 week from the time the request came to get all the documentations put together. So you truly don't have time to create documentation if it wasn't already there. So I guess that's the important piece to remember, is it's a quick turnaround and not lots of time to respond. So next slide, please. So what was requested was a calendar of events, an agenda for any mentoring training that occurred during that particular quarter, and also a list of the mentors that were recruited. And you could use the tracking sheet that National Council had provided to us, or another mechanism if you wanted to do that. So we're going to look next at what I did for each one of those. So next slide, please. So for the calendar of events, I have been using a tracking tool that actually our association has suggested that those folks working with grants should keep documentation on each time, each period of time they spent on the grant and what it did. So I have a tracking tool that I will share with any of you who would like it, that's just basically a blank of what I'm going to show you. And I took out, for this particular documentation that they requested, I took out the dates from July 1st through September 30th, which coincided with the grant for quarter 3, and shared that with them. And then I also shared a session guide that I've been keeping to list what I did for each session that I did with the 3 different groups of children that I worked with. So, Adam, if you can bring up either one of those 2 tools.
Okay, bear with me just for a second, folks. Okay, so I have several documents here: 4-H Tech Wizard, Mentor Orientation, Agenda. I've got 6 documents for this first email. Do you want me to just open them all up, Angela?
Okay, there's one that said, an email that said following slide 5.
Okay.
And there were 2 documents attached to that. One of them was a tracking tool, and the other one was called Session Guide, if you can find one of those 2.
Okay.
Okay, yes, you have the one that's a tracking tool. And what it did, and the bigger document's a little differently, but I just sent for them to document all my activity, which they asked for a calendar of events, so you possibly could be just using a regular calendar and send them copies of the pages. That would likely work, but if you see, I have the dates on there, and when I started and what I did, so kind of a little bit of a description for all the time that I spent on the grant. And so I just sent them that this particular document. And the O stands for OJJDP because I was working on 2 different grants at the time. So I isolated the calendar for that specific grant. Any questions about that? Okay, so that's a tool that actually my husband created, but I think it would do what it certainly seemed to satisfy what they needed. And then the second one that I did to document the calendar of events was to be a little more specific, and it was a session tool. And I just took the weeks, and you will see over in the first column what week number it was and the date of the week, because I have 3 different groups of children. Those dates have their different dates. Sometimes it was the primary thing that I focused on, but sometimes there was some community service, or as you'll see, some other comments like there was a computer challenge that they were working on. And this was to just document a little completely for Teresa the nature of the time spent on sessions, because the first tool that I sent that was a calendar of events basically just said session done. It's like the Seneca Babcock group of boys or group of girls. So this was the second supplement to that. Okay, so I think that takes care of that, and we can go back to the PowerPoint.
So just one second. So how do those 2 differ, or do they just, in a sense, validate each other?
Well, basically, one documented the whole range of activities that I did, because certainly for programming, there's a lot more that you do. You might respond to emails, you might be working on, you might be picking up supplies, you might have a meeting. So one tracked all the hours that were associated with the grant. That was the tracking tool, where the session guide really specifically looked at what was the work done between mentee and mentors.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so next slide.
And how much time did it take you to provide the information that you provided on those different forms?
Well, daily I keep the tracking tool every time I turn in, because I'm hourly paid, and I'm sure that's not the case for everybody working on the grant, but I deal with Kronos, and so whatever I turn into Kronos for my hours, I just make a brief description in that document of what I did with that time, that day. So it's really 2 or 3 minutes of time. The session is, I just keep that as a running guide of what I did with each group. And again, it's not a lot of time. I just kind of set that up from the beginning. It also helps me when a group might not meet because of a holiday, and so it also keeps me on track exactly, did I cover that activity or not? So neither of them take really, it's an ongoing piece. It's just kind of part of my daily routine with work is to just make a note in each one of those.
And it's certainly better doing it on a daily basis or a weekly basis than at the end of a quarter.
Right, it definitely, I would say, excuse the emergency sounds in the background. Okay, so the second question was what happened at the mentoring trainings. So I actually recorded 4 trainings. I'm not sure that everybody would have even called these trainings, but I did. 2 of them were field trips, one to Erie County Fair, and because the mentors were really involved, given some educational background on ag, STEM, experiences. I included that, and I will show you in just a little bit what those documents look like that I sent to Teresa based on these two field trips, one to Rhinestone Woods. That happens to be an annual nature conservation type of field day. And then we had a training, the Kiva planks, and some of you who went to the National NMP 5 conference may remember the creator of Kiva planks was there. And so we wanted our mentors to just come together and get some ideas of how those planks could be used. And in some of the pictures I've included in this PowerPoint, you will see and have seen some activity with Kiva planks. So I included what we did at that training. And then the Niagara Power project presentation was a session, but it was an educational experience and to some level a training for the mentors who came. So I included all of those, plus I also sent them an orientation outline, what we do, because at that point I had a new mentor coming in who had been working as a volunteer with the program, so I did an orientation during that particular quarter as well, so I additionally included the agenda for the orientation. So if, Adam, if you could bring up some of those agenda lists.
So, Angela, you provided like either an agenda or explanation for each of those items, those events that you mentioned as part of the training?
Right. All of them have an agenda except for the one to call the Ag Adventure one, and we actually had a passport that was used to take people to different activities on the fairground, the Ag Adventure passport. So I sent them that. So this is just the one on the orientation, and you'll see it was one that I use, and I continue to use it right now. This is what we do in our orientation. So that agenda was sent. But then there are the 4 what's considered trainings, because I believe on our report it's indicated that trainings and the orientation are different, but I wasn't sure that the orientation might not be an appropriate document to also send, so I included it.
Okay. And was that sufficient to satisfy?
That was sufficient, yes. That seemed to work fine. And yes, this is the Kiva planks a little bit differently, and I had a particular handout, so I included the handout that I used for that. It was a much simpler tool. So my agendas are all just basically the same. They all look the same, just different items listed. So when I'm printing an agenda, I include where it's located, what time it was, and the date. And so that's good for me to remember and be able to go back to it, but it's also documented for them all that information as well.
Did they request sign-in sheets for the trainings?
I use a sign-in sheet, but I did not send it, and it wasn't requested. The question just asked for an agenda. I definitely think we should be able to include a sign-in sheet. Usually the trainings don't ask for the information on our progress report doesn't ask for how many attended. We have to have that for our expenses in order, if we're using food or something like that, we're supposed to have that. So those tools work for other things, and we should have them available if we were asked for documentation on expenses. But it wasn't needed for this particular validation review. And this is just the handout that I used on the Kiva, and I sent that to them because it explained a little bit more of what we did in the training than the agenda itself did. So that's why it included that. And that's, Adam, what you have shown them is probably sufficient on that, even though I know I had included another couple of documents.
Okay.
All right, I think we can go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the next slide asks for a list of mentors recruited, and I used the sheet, one of the sheets within the Excel spreadsheet that National 4-H has given us to use for documentation. So we need to go back on the slide, but we need to go to the tool that was listed in slide, I think that's slide 9.
Okay.
Wait a minute. No, excuse me, not slide 9, probably slide 7. The one that says mentor tracking sheet with data, Erie County.
Okay, let me see if I can call that up.
Okay, thank you.
Slide 7. It might be a good time to take some questions. I have to restart my email.
Okay. All right, any questions from anyone? Or comments? I will tell you that what he's pulling up, you will see that they asked, there was a further follow-up because there were still a little bit of information that Teresa was looking for. So I still use this document, but I had to add a little bit to it, but I'll explain that further. Okay, here it is, and I pulled it up. So this is it's listed, the tab is Master List Mentors, and this is what I have been keeping, and this is what I sent to them. You can scroll back to the front. I think there's another column or two in the front of this. Yeah. So I actually have the name there, and you can see that I also use a code for my mentors as well as my mentees. And this just documented that and the date they were initially trained or completed their training and their starting of their program and what day they were matched, and then the matches of the mentees. And so those you see in the column labeled F, the age for the mentees. And because I had some mentees who dropped out and we needed to put new people, there are a few places where there's red, and there's a note that says that, you know, if they had exited the program, at that point I put their name in red, so that at no one time is there more than 4 mentees with a single person, even though at some point a mentor in that particular year might have covered more than 4 mentees, but not more than 4 at any one time. So in the third quarter, which this covered, for example, the third person, Carrie, she had covered 4 children, but one of them dropped out and another child was picked up. That's not really happening this year for my program. I'm really set with the program with the mentees, and nobody's being added after the first quarter, but I did add some in last year in quarters after the first quarter, and so that's what happened. And then if a mentor left, such as number 13 on the list, Christy Severinson, she left at the beginning of September, but her names, if you scroll down just a little bit, Adam, you will see, and I documented this in my report, Ricky Watts, number 17, picked up all of the students Christy had because we knew that was going to happen. Christy had taken a job that needed, so she wasn't able to continue working with the program, and Ricky just picked up the students, and there was a transition there, and that was documented. So,
how would somebody else be able to see that clearly? I mean, you know it because these are your folks.
Right. I actually documented it just in the report, how we handled it. But other than that, when they asked for the validation piece, you know, I explained that we knew that this was coming. Christy, like in June, and over the summer months, Ricky began working with the same kids that she had worked with, so that was in the report itself. So there was no question asked about that particular piece, but I guess a person would need to make a comment, and you will see that there was a follow-up, and that's what's going to come back, that I took the same document you're looking at now and added some information that was not transparent to Teresa. So that was the second question. Okay, if we can go back to the PowerPoint. Go on to the next slide. Okay, so after those documents were sent, and they were basically, I don't think it took me more than, you know, an hour or so to just locate what documents could support the questions. And then about a month later, there was an email that came on a Sunday afternoon saying we need to see support to show the 7 added mentees and the 5 drop mentees in your quarter 3. And I had started with 70 mentees. And then at the end of the second quarter, there were 27 mentors, and there needed to be some documentation to show the 3 new mentors and the 2 mentors who left. So that was the second question. That's where if you go to the next slide, I showed this question with a mentee tracking that I've just created because I found over time, and again, I was adding more mentees along the way. Won't be quite as complicated this year because we're set on our numbers and we're not adding, but I did add in a few cases. So I'll show you the tool that I just kind of created. It's very simple. There's probably lots of things that could be done, but this is what I use. Okay, and all it really does is take the list of mentees, and in quarter 1, I just put the number 1 if they were included in the group. It's because it's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can use the sum function to get your numbers. And I use yellow to show differences. And if you're looking at this tool, the BB0001. I didn't send this to National, but there was another column in my own document where I actually write the child's name. Like I happen to know that's Brianna Belt is number 1. But I used her code name because that's how she's listed in the online report that we give. And I just make a note of what's done. And so a yellow empty square in any quarter, those columns with 1s in them represent the 4 quarters. And so if they're added, like there's one person who actually visited the program a lot, number 44, had come and been in the program on again, off again, but became really regular toward the end of the 3rd quarter, so he was added in the 4th quarter. Again, those will not be things I do regularly this year, but the yellow helped me as I look back at the progress report to see exactly who I was counting. In the 3rd column, you can see an empty yellow square means that person dropped that quarter. So that indicated the ones who were dropped, and if they were added, the number 1 is highlighted in yellow in the column 3. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this, you will see that in quarter 1, there were 65 children, 70 at the end of quarter 2, 72 at the end of quarter 3. And when the question was asked, how do you know who was added, who are the 5 that are, I think that was the question, who were the 5 that were dropped and the 7 that were added, you could go back and the highlighted yellow, if they were dropped, it's highlighted yellow with nothing in the column. And yes, such as, yeah, that one. And so that's how I worked with it, and that's what I had been using. It was just a tool that I came up with so that I was always sure I had an accurate count. And you can see there were several added in the 4th quarter. Most of those, just for information for you, were kids that had occasionally visited, but once the new school year started, they instead of being an occasional visit to our class, they were regularly attending, and so I put all of them back on in the report for the 4th quarter. But again, this validation was for quarter 3.
Okay, and did they understand that? Did it get through, or were there more questions after this?
There was one more question about this one, and I will tell. Yeah, that's the third email follow-up on this. Was related to this particular question, and I will show you what I did with that in just a little bit. Then there was a second question on the follow-up, show us what you did with the mentors. And so it's basically the document you saw earlier, but I added a column that it just was notes that I had, so I had to put it back in. So if we can go to mentor tracking sheet with data 2.
Okay, I'll try to get there for you.
Okay, thanks. I know this is the main.
One of the things I'm hoping is that we can get a site set up where we could share all of these tools and anything else that we think others might be interested in, because you're hearing about it now, and some of you may have an immediate need or think that you don't need it right now. But then down the road, you may decide you want to access it. And even if you can't get in touch with Angela, it would be great if we could just have a common site where we could have these things available for folks.
Okay. I am very happy to share anything that I'm using that someone else feels that could be helpful for them. Okay, so what Adam has up now is the tool that you saw earlier, but I added a notes column, and it answers the question of when was the mentor at, you know, how did you get from 27 mentors at the end of quarter 2, and you're saying in your 3rd quarter report that you had 3 new mentors and 2 mentors who left, and I did that simply in the notes. It probably could have been done exactly like I did for the mentees, but I had not set it up as a much smaller base, not a lot of changes. But I had a couple of had been basically mentors in training that had been who moved out of the area. That was who had dropped. I think actually one dropped, and Christy dropped. That I had mentioned Christy earlier to you, that she changed jobs and left, and then 3 that were added in the 3rd quarter. And the notes just in that last column just indicated exactly what had happened with everybody up through quarter 3.
Angela, are these the tracking sheet that we're looking at now? Which is the one that you send with your quarterly report?
That's actually the last thing I'm going to show you.
Oh, okay.
It's part of the, but it's not one that's required to be sent. August report. Only the one on tracking mentor-mentee sessions is required for a monthly report. And that actually, if we go back to the...
While we're waiting, Steve had a question. So,
Angela, would an enrollment sheet for your mentors serve as the same purpose with the date that they were entered into the system rather than the tracking sheet that you have there?
Right, I would think so. And they were very clear in that original request that if you used a different mechanism to track, you could use that. So I don't think they are at all concerned about our creating documents that work better for us, as long as they show the information. So the last email came. There was a request that came Friday, April the 15th. So, you know, a few days after the second one had been addressed, with the question, how do you tell what mentees have exited at what time? So, how would our individual mentees track for start and end dates? And that actually I track on the tool that I send monthly, and that was my response. If you want to go to the next slide, see what I said to that. I just stated the same day the request came in that the start and end dates are on the meeting tracking form that was submitted each quarter, and I really just sent back in the same third quarter tracking form that I had sent at the end of early October when we put in our third quarter report. So I think that's the piece that if we can go to that one last document, I believe, Adam, that's in an email.
Okay, let me see if I can get there.
Yeah, because we're just about out of time, so we're hoping you can get there. And while we're waiting for that to come up, Steve is showing me the enrollment sheets that they use in Franklin County, which has a lot of good information on it as well. And also it would serve the purpose of helping with knowing when people began to work with the program. So I'm thinking that it would be good for us to try to set up some way of letting folks know some of the different ways they can go about documenting or forms and things that can help with facilitating enrollment of mentors or tracking of mentors in general. But certainly what Angela has done maybe above and beyond, but it certainly came in handy and worked and was very impressive, and we wanted folks to be aware of this if they're looking for a model for how to further validate their work.
And so basically what you're seeing here is what we all turn in, and I don't know how many of you do this. I just put a note in the column when I've got the code for I use the code for the mentor, I use the code for the mentee, and then there's a note that says mentee began on a certain date, like you can see 3/5/15 or 3/11/15, and then at the bottom of the column, and I'm not sure those early ones because most of those people stayed in, but as you scroll out this, if you can go a little bit farther out, okay, you can see there where a mentee moved and dropped, and I have it beside of a date. You know, just like it's underneath. A letter was sent on 9/2/15 for this particular person I'm looking at now, and then it was indicated that they had moved and dropped from the program. So when Teresa posed the question, how do you know when they come in and when they leave, I keep it right on this particular tool. There is a place on their tool that I looked at a future point that you can add all of this information, but I just didn't make it an extra document. I just kept it within this one. And then the very last thing, if we go back to the last PowerPoint, so this question that I was answering went in April 15th, and then I kept wondering if we were okay with it, and the last PowerPoint slide shows the response that finally came. And that was May 25th, and Teresa recognized that she had never come back to indicate that we were fine, that we had answered all of her questions. So it just was a little bit delayed, but just an oversight, it looks like, on her part to not get back to us quicker to say that everything she needed was okay. So that's that.
Well, thank you so much. I think the reason we wanted to share this with you was just to be sure everybody was aware of the fact that this kind of request could be made of your county. And whether you decide to use the tools that Angela is doing or some other way, just know that very arbitrarily your site might be chosen for some follow-up to your quarterly report information. So you may want to just look at the questions that came from Teresa and be sure that you have a system or a way of being able to provide backup information for each of those different questions. And I'm hoping that we can get something set up that would just be a way of sharing different tools and resources folks are using throughout the program, so that if you want to strengthen or modify anything you're doing, you're not starting from scratch. And certainly we'll have Angela's tools available in that setup. So thank you for sharing this information with us. And I guess, June, we need to make sure that everybody who's not on the call knows that this was taped and is available for them to follow up with, and really urge them to do that, because evaluation and validation of what we're doing is a key aspect of the program, and we're being asked to do that even to a greater extent.
Absolutely, and I just echo the thanks that need to go to Angela for doing this, and because I just cannot imagine a better response. It was very, very thorough, and the questions were tough because they were really looking at the quarterly progress report and saying, how do you know that this is correct? What validation, what documentation do you have that supports why you put a 5 rather than a 6 or whatever? And it's just wonderful to be able to know with confidence that we have really solid documentation to support our programs when we're under this microscope. So it was kudos and applause to Angela, for sure.
Yep. You make us continue to be ranked as one of the top 4 mentoring programs in the country. So thank you very much for your efforts.
Okay, gang. So our time is up, and I think the simple thing to do, rather than SharePoint and all this other stuff, is we'll just set up a Google Docs site. They're very easy to use, and everybody knows how to use Google, and it's not a big step to use Google Docs. So we can easily set that up.
That sounds good, June. Okay, so to be continued.
To be continued. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, and be on the lookout for the information about the survey for Betsy Brown.
I will send it out. And all they're looking for is 10 mentors, so I'm sure New York State can help them be responsive to this application that they have in, because it does, if council wins the designation, they will get a trip to the White House, and they've already promised that they would highlight our program. So who doesn't want to be highlighted at the White House?
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and enjoy this beautiful day.
Safe travel.